Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Way of the Showman, where we view the world through the lens of showmanship. I am Captain Frodo, and I will be your gracious host and guide along the way. I've had the pleasure of traveling to Stockholm to perform a show, and while I was there I got to meet up with my friend Jay Gilligan in the flesh, which is a rare pleasure, and we got to chat, and I got the next morning after the gig, I got picked up by a 79-year-old man, Ivar Heckscher, who is one of the key people in from the very beginning of the Stockholm Circus School, and together the three of us did some impromptu teaching and talking to some students out at the school, juggling students, and it's just one of these great pleasures of touring, when I don't just end up going to a place, doing a job. Sometimes, it's a corporate event. Some of the gigs that we do is absolutely magic. And this particular event, the people who are organizing it, Ulla and Sarah, they're both very nice. And I have a more personal relationship to them, so it was already a better kind of gig. It's not sometimes you go into a gig and it's you don't know the people who you're doing it with, and you get there and you're just one little pawn in a large corporate display of whatever it is, and as interesting as that might be, it's something completely different when you go over and you actually meet someone and you really feel like the time is counting. It was very, very sort of interesting times, because at the time that we were there doing the event, Ulla was supposed to have been at the event as well, but couldn't be there because him and his partner was in the hospital about to have a baby. So we're like continuously trying to check whether Sarah's checking the phone and going, have they had the baby now? Has it happened now? Or whatever. So that was an absolute pleasure, and as most of you know, faithful listeners of this here podcast, through previous conversations and appearances on this podcast, and more to come in the future, Jay Gilligan and myself have been exploring not just because we went through a long process where we created the show Reflex, which we will talk about in a future episode, and something that we've already recorded, but that won't come out for a good while. We haven't just worked out how to make a show together with him in a long process. We've also then tried to work out how can this process be generalized so that it can be beneficial for lots of people, as in a sort of teaching thing, and just had this wonderful sort of synergy or confluence of where we were talking to Eva, and it was me and Jay, and we were talking, and there were some students there that were showing us work and seeing how some of the things that we've talked about and explored for so long on very personal grounds, just to make Reflex for New York, but also that was involved, the same process was involved when I was working with Morgan James to do his show, and all the other people that I have spoken about before, where we've done smaller or bigger projects together with. So it's something very exciting, because all the stuff that I talk about on this podcast seems sometimes to be a little bit abstract, like you don't know what to do with it. When it's translated into conversation between an artist, young or experienced, doesn't matter, it does translate into a very practical, a surprisingly practical approach to doing the shows. I do think that I will have to make one more stab at this, of like synthesizing the whole season of shows here down to just 3 or 4 episodes, and so to get to the bottom of it, like a showmanship for everyone, or practical showmanship in its essence, or something like that. But it is very encouraging, and this kind of masterclass or workshop or course thing is a very real aspiration for Jay and myself, so hope to tell you more about that in the future. But now let's get on to the question for today, which is, are shows and art exclusively human phenomena, or are there other animals who make art? The answer to this will be found in a long and complex way by listening to the following message. Are shows exclusively human phenomena? Are shows completely artificial? And I use this wording because that's how it's expressed towards the end of the Illuminated Manifesto, which, of course, states, Showtime, 100% artificial, and therefore completely human. So if the manifesto states that, I gotta ask myself, rhetorically or for real, are shows exclusively human phenomena? And to begin answering this, let's look at this word artificial. Now, the first listed definition of artificial in the dictionary is something made by human skill or created by humans. And even though this is the first listed definition of the word, it is very common to use the word these days. Use artificial when you mean something that humans make that's negative. So it's got a negative connotation, like something we make, like plastic shrink-wrapped individual pieces of vegetables or fruits. But this kind of artificiality is not the kind of artificiality we're talking about in the manifesto. I don't think so. And neither does it refer to something inauthentic, unnatural, or contrived, which are further negative definitions of artificial. And all this negativity is quickly sort of bandied about when talking about artificiality these days. And with human-caused pollution, habitat destruction in the form of deforestation and degradation of the world's oceans, and climate change ever present in our minds, anything made by humans has gotten tainted by a kind of suspicion, and rightly so. But I would argue that these negative connotations are related to the kind of thing, like when someone says, that's not natural, and that they mean that this isn't good. A link is then made between natural and bad. And often not natural is bad. Like, if you say that, then it has some sort of moral outrage component. It's like, oh, that's not natural. And often they're talking about same-sex relations, or the use of intoxicating substances, or the use of chemotherapy or vaccines or whatever to combat illnesses. Or they have these negative things. And the statement, of course, equates natural with good and unnatural with bad. And this is not strictly logically true. Cyanide and childhood leukemia are both natural but not good. And dentistry and tiramisu are unnatural things, but they are good. So what I'm saying here is that artificiality or artificial has gotten a bad rap. And going back to this first listed definition of artificial as something made by human skill or created by humans, we don't find any negative valence. There is no intrinsic good or bad quality associated with it, just that it's made by humans. No qualitative statement necessary, actually. And when we look at the etymology of the word, or like where it came from, we find the Latin word artificium, which means craftsmanship. And the word is, which is a good word for us along the way of the shaman, studying the craft of showmanship. So the craftsmanship, that's a good starting point. And artificium, this is made up of the words ars, A-R-S, ars, which apart from being a little funny, means art. And fic, as in fisio, or fic, F-I-C, this is apparently some form of facere. It's Latin, and that means to do. So it means to do art. Well, that's pretty good for us here. It's also related to the word artifice, which of course, also has several definitions with a sort of trickster quality, like clever tricks, stratagems, trickery, cunning, ingenuity, and inventiveness. But importantly, artifice, for us, artifice can also mean a skillful or artful creation or contrivance, something that you've made that's skillful or artful. So I am just making this case for 100% artificial as not being something negative, but just being made by human beings. So getting back to artificial, like stone tools, bicycles, synthetic penicillin, poems, and juggling are examples of artificial things. Stone tools, bicycles, synthetic penicillin, poems, and juggling. All artificial things. And from those examples we can see that for the most part they're not just created by humans, but are also made for human purposes. Made by humans for humans. We can spot, though, in these a little difference between the three first ones of the stone tools, bicycles, and synthetic penicillin, and the last two, which are the juggling and the poems. And later, the last two of poems and juggling is, in a certain sense, could be said to be more for humans than the first three. They're maybe more human in a sense, because a bicycle, a stone tool, and even penicillin could, in theory, be useful for animals. They are at least objects or things in the world with a functionality likely to impact the living world. Like an orangutan could, in theory, find a Stone Age hand axe in the shrinking forests of Sumatra and use it to cut its mate free from a poacher's net. A sick animal, like a horse or a dog, could eat penicillin and rid themselves of some life-threatening bacterial infection. And maybe a colony of coral could gather and attach themselves to a sunken bicycle, making it the seed of a new reef, as far-fetched as some of those connections might be. Well, at least I didn't suggest that wild Russian bears inspired by their bicycle and moped-riding bear comrades in the Great Moscow Circus took to riding around the forest on stolen bikes. I didn't use that as an example, so we're not going quite as tenuous as we could, but as tenuous as these links and potential usefulness of bikes and pills and Stone Age tools might be to animals, poetry and juggling are even more alien to them. And in this sense, these phenomena could maybe be said to be even more human-centric, even more human activities than the objects, because the other three are objects, whilst a poem or a juggling makes no sense to amoebas, dogs, or octopuses. But when I say that a poem or juggling doesn't make sense to amoebas, or dogs, or octopuses, or an octopi, that might be true to amoebas, but I was thinking that if a dog watches somebody juggle, the only thing that a dog really will understand and really appreciate is when the juggler drops. Because I reckon as long as the juggler juggles the balls, the dog will think that the juggler is a tease and keeps the toys to himself and is like he's selfish. Whilst when the juggler fails and drops, then if he drops a ball, the meaningless actions of the juggling will fully become graspable for the dog, who will think, finally the man with the balls sharing, I can get involved finally. And it would probably grab a ball and then run off. And just to continue that animal juggling flight of fancy, as much as they aren't interested, if we could get an octopus interested in juggling, it would no doubt be supremely interesting for a human juggler, or indeed for any human audience. And imagine the patterns you could do with 8 tentacles and all the tentacular choreographic potential. So juggling might not be so interesting, like throwing a rock in defense, or using a rock to throw it or whatever to catch food. That could be useful for an animal, like you could imagine an ape could do something like that. But juggling it is a whole other level of throwing and catching, I guess. And juggling is a different level of artificiality, not accessible for other animals than us. And of course, poetry is done deal. Very few dogs enjoy poetry. Amoebas, who knows what they think. So are shows, or art for that matter, exclusively human phenomena? Now that we've looked at this thing with artificiality or whatever, are they exclusively human? And as with all biological and cultural questions, I find the answer to be not straightforward. So let's explore this a little bit, because there are some particular animals whose behavior and creations makes the hope of a simple yes and no answer quite unlikely. And a case in point is the Australian bowerbird. When you see the extraordinarily complex courtship and mating behavior of the male bowerbird, one could certainly make a case for all the dancing and all hopping, all wing gesticulating, all prancing about display, that it could be a kind of show. And some of the paradise birds of Papua New Guinea also have equally elaborate and fantastic displays with the feather get-up to match. Yet biologists and ornithologists hesitate to call straight-up mating behavior art or shows, regardless of how intricate they are. They are more often considered displays where one member of a species, mostly the male, demonstrates how fit and strong they are with the sole purpose of making the female want to mate with them. Although the behavior is elaborate and complex, its purpose is most often considered strictly utilitarian. Therefore, it's not commonly described as art. So, is the case closed then? Animals don't make art? Well, I don't know, not really, not yet. Because this is where the bowerbird, that's why we've chosen that bird to look at, he goes one step further, because it constructs what's called a bower, and that's why it's called a bowerbird. And this is a supremely beautiful and elaborate construction of sticks and straws, and they're bent into architectural shapes, often in the shape of gorgeous little curved portals reminiscent of something created by some forest-dwelling, nature-worshipping Lilliputian pagan cult, like something you'd see in the Wicker Man, only made from some tiny, minuscule little being. And with this portal or gate as a kind of central feature, the male bird places carefully chosen and color-coordinated objects all around this little portal thing. It's like things like pebbles and sticks, but often much more unusual things, and absolutely not picked up by random. So when the bird's preferred color is blue, if that's its preferred color, as is the case with the particular species of bowerbird called the satin bowerbird, then anything that a bird can find, flowers, leaves, or berries, as well as bottle tops, bits of glass, candy wrappers, toys stolen from children who walking in the forest, whatever, if it has any kind of thing that has the right shade of blue, the bird will pick it up and carefully place it into its bower creation, in circles, a kind of around, or using the landscape there to sort of highlight everything. And the objects are often then laid out, not at random, they're often laid out so that the largest objects and pebbles are placed furthest away from the bower, from this little portal, and then gradually getting smaller and smaller as they get nearer the bower. And this could, exactly why this is, we don't know, but it does kind of create a sort of optical illusion, making the bird appear larger when it's dancing at the focal point of its display, and the female will be out there looking at the big things, and it goes smaller, and it's like a landscape painting, where the things that are far away are painted smaller. Very, very interesting. So this is absolutely worth Googling, because me looking at a video think David Attenborough has some stuff about it, but just Google the bowerbird, and it comes up straight away, and you'll see these peculiar little. It's not peculiar. It's stunningly beautiful, actually, and highly intriguing, because these architectural constructions, together with the elaborate dance displays, I would say it makes an even stronger case for animal artistry, even if the only reason they exist is for the male bird to get laid. But if all these things are done with the aim of impressing the female, then at least to a certain extent, couldn't we say that he's got his audience in mind? He is doing what he does for it to have an effect, for it to affect his spectator, or the spectators, and most, I don't know what the hit rate is, but only the very best of the bowers and the very best plumage and the best dancing will attract or give the opportunity for mating. So he has an aim, and he has a response that he wants, but this is absolutely a one-track response he's after, and one-track aim. He's arguably more than any human artist thinking and creating with his genitals, so to speak. These bird bowers, what they do, and these bowerbirds, what they do and build is really something else. I mean, there is a crow's nest in a pine tree where I walk my dog, and that sort of random jumble of sticks and twigs is about as far from the Australian bowerbird's elaborate construction as a shack is to the Sydney Opera House. A comparison which at first might seem arbitrary, but if we look closer, there are many seemingly obvious similarities. And then later we'll get back to this notion of calling the Opera House a shack. But the bower, what the bower actually is, it's not a nest. It's not made for a female to lay her eggs into. So it isn't a nest. If the bowerbird's sort of proto-show is successful, then it ends up with a quick mating, and after which the female flies off, leaving the dancer and his elaborate mating arena bower behind, and then she flies to lay her egg in a nest that she has made herself, safe up in a tree, because bowers, they're always constructed on the forest floor, which is a vulnerable place to lay eggs. So the male creates the bower for the courtship displays, and that's the reason why it's an arena exclusively for staging these elaborate dance performances. With all this in mind, can we then say that birds make art when it's so elaborate? And is this revealing that shows is not an exclusive phenomena? Well, maybe. From a certain point of view, I think that could be seen to be true. Just looking at the actual creation and execution of it all, it's very artful and everything. But yet, once again, I think it's more complicated, because there seems to be an overlap, yet we might be dealing with two things which appear similar, yet aren't actually related. There are, as I see it, several non-trivial aspects separating bird art from what we human beings think of it as art, and this is important. An important example for me is the relationship between the bird artist and his bird audience. The female bird has a pretty binary reaction to the bower and dance display. Let him mate with her or not. That's it. This is pretty far from the complexity of responses the human audiences has when they watch a show at the Opera House. The whole construction of a bower as a stage for a courting dance display has one very specific purpose with a very specific it's so specific that it's binary. It's either on or off. So in that way, the whole bower could be seen as just an extension of his mating displays. This is something that Richard Dawkins wrote a book called The Extended Phenotype, and a phenotype is whatever peculiar or characteristic trait that one particular species has, but it's all connected to the genes and the actual body of the animal, so the feathers and all of that. But he has come up with this concept of the extended phenotype, which then includes things like the bower or a nest or whatever else that might be characteristic of a certain species, like the particular interest that the satin bowerbird takes to blue objects. So in this way, it's seen in this way, as reductive as it might be or whatever, you could say that it's his elaborate dancing and this other the architectural or the stick gathering and folding and bending into little portals, that all of this is it's a part of the mating display. It's just a creation intended exclusively to get laid. But is it at all possible for a human creation, say, that the human creation, like a dance, that it could have only one binary interpretation? That you go in, everybody sees the dance, and everybody understands exactly the same thing. Do you go in and they dance, and you go, oh yeah, 2, yeah, +2, yeah, and then all the audience goes out and says, yeah, that was 4. Do they all elicit one and the same response in a human audience? Is this even possible? I don't think so. And just for the sake of the argument, if you were to suggest that perhaps the birds also have all these other thoughts and feelings arise in them from their artistic experiences as they watch the dancing male in his beautifully constructed bower, which, that these watching that instigates all kinds of desires and ideas in the female, which were also intended by the male bird. I would say that if this is what you suggest, then that seems rather tenuous. But let's say, though, that I would grant you the possibility that there is a deep network of meaning going on in the dance apart from the mating issues. I would argue that these are largely supplementary, that it's something that comes as a byproduct of the other. What's so important, why the bird is really doing it. Whilst human art, the aspect of the artist potentially getting laid is arguably that's what's supplementary in this process. Whilst the artistic experience in all its complexity and how this connects to history and how it places itself into the particular context of now in regards to the history of art, etc., and if you just do an entertainment like we're doing, like are they having a real good time on all sorts of levels, then I'd say that whether or not you get laid afterwards is secondary. Well, who knows? There are a lot of artists out there, so what do I know about that? But to me, the fact that we sort of talked about before, that it's not a binary, it's not possible to have just a binary interpretation of seeing somebody doing a dance. So this open-endedness of the artistic experience is, to me, the key to the human art experience. Art's ability to express a multiplicity of meaning through the unity of one artwork is, to me, a fundamental aspect of human art. So art's ability to express a multiplicity of meanings going on at the same time, and all of it sort of radiating out from the unity of one artwork, this is, to me, a fundamental aspect of what human art is. And there's a huge spectrum and practically endless scope in interpretation, connections and interactions open for human audiences. Emotional, intellectual, erotic, exciting, meditative, sad, hilarious, disgusting, yet compelling, relaxing. It can offer an escape from the stress or repetitive boredom of regular life, or it can inspire and incite you to go out and change the world or your own reality. And at least in theory, all of these things that I just mentioned, that this could potentially be derived from one artwork. That would be a good artwork. Can't come with any specific examples of that, but I guess it would be, yeah, who knows. Let's not even go down that road. I also think that the relationship of the human showman or performer to his audience and the world and to himself and his art is of a different nature than the bird's relationship to his audience, the world, himself and his art is. Using the him and his because it is a bird and because of the eternal thing that we go on with, that I go on about here with the showman, that it has a male connotation. Anyway, but as mentioned, the preference for a particular shade of blue is something which is true of the entire satin bowerbird species. They don't just happen to like this or that color and choose this or that, but art as we human beings understand it and how we participated in all its glorious intricacies and endless varieties and complexities, that the difference between that of like how one species does one thing and how the human beings just do any random thing. As much as we look back and we go, well, that was the Baroque period, that was the Rococo period, and this is the Art Nouveau, there was still a whole bunch of other stuff going on, and at the same time, which was not following these particular trends. And then there was also within even the Art Nouveau movement, there was different branches of it that are not overlapping in the way that a satin bowerbird can be expected to make a certain kind of, or have certain preferences for their art. So this endless complexity and simplicity of these two as a sort of ends of a spectrum, I say that comparing these two is so different in scope that I'm reminded again of before here, this thing with the Sydney Opera House and the shack. Because in a certain sense, the Sydney Opera House and the shack are, they're both the same. Well, in a certain sense they are, because they are both house structures. Yet the difference in complexity of the two and the expression that's all this is so large that there's sort of a difference in kind. They're so different that it's not really worth comparing them, because the things that are the same about them seems absolutely trivial. The fact that they both have a roof and walls or whatever. So we have a case of apples and oranges. Is it the same case, or is this a case with a case, as in a case file? We have that about it. Anyway, they are related, but they are like different species. So on top of all these differences, I think that there is a further difference of whether they are indeed related to each other at all, or are they just similar phenomena which does not really share the same origins at all. And to illuminate what I mean, I will use a rather complex example from evolution, but this goes back to this of the idea of seeing structures in the world and being able to combine them. Sometimes I realize that I see a structure, or this is like that, but the like that is often a little bit obscure, as some of my faithful listeners, such as yourself, might have already understood. Some of this novelty is kind of fun and everything, but this might top the list of these obscure or far distant links or structures that have similarity. But so let's just look at this, because I'll use this rather complex example from evolution. So as we know, everything that's alive is related and connected through the process of evolution. So we are related to apes and share a common ancestor with the chimpanzees. So specifically about 6 million years ago, there was an animal, an ancestor, that split up and that was the last ancestor that we shared, where the chimpanzees went one way and what ended up being human beings went another way. So in evolutionary time, 6 million years is not so long. Biological evolution is a very slow process, so as is to be expected, 6 million years on, we still share many features with chimpanzees. Going further back to 750 million years ago, that's around about the time that we find the last common ancestor that we human beings share with the octopus. This means that we're also related to the octopus, but they are much, much more distant relatives. So 750 million years ago, this is a pretty long time, even in evolutionary terms. So the features we immediately recognize from ourselves in the octopus are not quite as many as with the apes. And that said, almost nothing, no organ, form, or behavior is without antecedents in our biological prehistory. Like nothing is new under the sun, as we say, because evolution, antecedents just means with some precursors, that there's something in it that has evolved into it, because evolution into something else, because evolution tinkers with what's already present. It takes something which is already present in an organism, and then as it gives birth to its progeny, that something, let's say an organ or something, is altered a little bit. It might, or the behavior or the form of the animals or something, that might be altered a little bit in the children that they give birth to, and then the next one might be a little bit different, and next one a little bit different, but it doesn't start again from scratch. That even if a redesign would greatly improve an organ or an organism, and here there are examples of nerves that in a giraffe starts up in the head, goes all the way down into the body, that nerve, and around some important blood vessel, that and up, all the way up back again to exactly where it started, because as the neck stretched, that blood vessel just pushed the nerve down and down, and even though it could have just jumped across there and reconnected itself, because of the design of where that blood vessel was, and when the neck was very short, then they were really close, but as the neck grew, the blood vessel that went across sort of pushed the nerve further down. So it's just, there are many examples of that. There's also something like that you could find. I think there's a program on, like, what's it called, like zoo autopsies or something like that, where they do an autopsy of some dead giraffe in a zoo, and they look at that specific thing, which is why I was thinking of that. But just evolution tinkers with what's already present. Like, it changes things a little bit here, a little bit there, and then over time it changes it a lot, like the neck getting longer or whatever. It doesn't sort of go that some animal says, oh, well, I should give birth to a giraffe that don't have this extremely long nerve, or I give it to a giraffe that has two necks instead, one low and one high, so I can get twice as much food in. It doesn't just think that and then come. This is probably not surprising to many people. Evolution changes what's already there. It doesn't create new from nothing. So it would be not be surprising that it should never be surprising that we find attributes or organs or whatever, like the heart or hands or eyes, that we find them as seeds in the animal kingdom. Or indeed that we might find when we see the bird dancing, that we go, oh yeah, that's the antecedent, that's the precursor, that's where we get dancing from, or whatever. But just because something came before something else in the fossil record doesn't actually mean that what came after is related to the former, because nature is messy and complex, and sometimes even those things really look similar, they can be very distantly related. This will hopefully make a distant but similar structure to our question as to whether there is any connection at all between bird art and human art. Like when we look at the bowerbird and bird art structures and the dance displays, the supposed similarities seems kind of obvious. Yet nothing is simple or straightforward in biology, and just because two things appears to be similar, down to surprising detail, that doesn't mean that they are related to each other or that they are examples of two of a kind. It might be a difference in kind instead. So in general, though, it is true that the amount a species differs from another species corresponds to how long ago they parted way, or how long ago their last common ancestor lived. So looking at the chimpanzees and the human, they are different, but not so different as the human and the octopus. Side by side, the human and chimpanzee, we got the head, we got the arms, we got the fingers, we got the legs, we got slightly different amount of hair and slightly different sort of expression, but pretty similar. But side by side, the human and the cephalopod, or cephalopod, which is the sort of name of squids and octopus and whatever, they are so totally different that very little overlap meets the eye. Yet, there turns out to be some peculiarly close similarities, and perhaps the reason so little similarity meets the eye is that the biggest similarity is found in the eye itself. It so happens that the human eye and the octopus eyes are surprisingly similar, to the point of being almost identical in their structure and function. Both species of eyes have a cornea, and both of them have irises and retinas and lenses. Both have fluid-filled interiors, and the list continues. But unless we know a lot about eye biology, this won't necessarily make much sense. And the eyes are very alike, and I'd say uncannily alike. But why is it uncanny? Why is it weird? Didn't we just inherit our eyes from the octopus? As it turns out, we didn't inherit our eyes from the octopus. Those eyes aren't related at all, because the eyes of the last common ancestor, the ancestor that 750 million years ago went into one of the babies of that thing, went in the direction that became the octopus, and the other one went into the direction that became mammals and eventually us. This little thing, this ancestor, was so totally different in almost every way, but except for being the eye that one had. This was so the eye that our last common ancestor that we had with the octopus 750 million years ago was so totally different in almost every way, except for being an organ which can detect light. The last common ancestor was a kind of flat worm that squirmed around on the sea floor, and it had a very primitive eye, which is merely it's like a cup-shaped depression with a single light-sensitive receptor inside. That meant that it only really sort of sees greyish colors or whatever, and can distinguish whether there's a light coming directly at it or whether something is blocking the light, which is very good for avoid being eaten or whatever, and possibly also for finding food if it was ate other organisms. But it is not a lens eye at all. It's so primitive, and that means when that was the eye that separated out into the branch that would become octopus, and 750 million years later we would be related to that same thing. So some, I don't know, undisclosed millions of years after the octopus lineage and the human lineage separated, then both the octopus and the humans separately evolved these eyes. They have nothing to do with each other, and they are almost identical. So to get how uncanny this is, just Google a picture of the eye of a giant squid. And if you didn't know the size or whatever, or how weird it is that it is there, that eye could just look like it belonged on a mammal, on a human. So this means that evolution has hit upon this lens eye at least twice. And the octopus and the mammals evolved their eyes completely independently. They're not related. And this is a beautiful example of what's called convergent evolution, which I understand as if there's sort of the potential of lens eyes that exists in nature, like in the abstract nature. There's like a form and function space out there, like a platonic idea or a form that actually exists as a potential for a particularly useful kind of eye. And that whenever an eye evolves, this is one possible outcome, which can be found, as demonstrated by the octopus and a human being. It can happen repeatedly. And it's like when you start looking into eyes and evolution and whatever, it's pretty interesting because eyes have evolved surprisingly often. As many as 40 separate times, maybe more, eyes have evolved because it's so unbelievably useful. So anyway, what am I actually trying to say with all these obscure links and connections between convergent evolution of eyes? Well, I just want to point out that just because what the bowerbird does appears similar to art, they might not be related at all. It might be a behavior that looks similar but that the function of it could be completely different. I mean, with the eyes of the octopus and us, both there it is to see, but one is to see, like with the giant squid, and hundreds of meters down into the water, and with us, so it's still completely different, yet similar, but perhaps the function of the art is so different that whatever the bowerbird is doing, it hasn't sort of, one of the things that I think separates it is that it hasn't really fully torn itself free from the tyranny of evolution by natural selection. And I'm bringing up the thing about the human and the octopus eyes evolving separately to point to the fact that the bird art didn't in any way directly evolve into human art. So with little functional overlap and no direct evolutionary transferal of the behavior of art creation between humans and birds, I would say building bowers and doing a mating dance in it is not art as we human beings think of art. Yeah, so I admit this was a long-winded and rather esoteric way of saying that a human showman does what he does when he steps up in front of an audience is not at all like what a bird or any other animal does when they put on any kind of display. They are different, totally different, I think. And just how totally different do I think they are? Not just as different as two species are from each other, since we've already seen that can be not very much, like between a chimpanzee and human being, or even less. It's just if you two birds evolve apart separated by a mountain or whatever, and somebody gets blown over a mountain, and the time that they're receptible to mate moves 1 month in each direction, and they don't match up when you put them together again, and that's in one understanding of what species are. This is now two different species. So that's not very, very big difference. So I would say that the difference between human art and an animal art or animal behavior that looks like art or could be interpreted like art is rather not as just as different as two species are, but maybe as vastly different as the field of physics is to biology. Like, there's no doubt that biology is rooted in physics. Anything alive is made of particles and matter and chemistry. And all that's alive, growing from roots or crawling around on our beautiful planet, has to obey the laws of physics. But biology has something extra, something more than physics. A rock is not alive, and the difference between a rock and a puppy is non-trivial. I imagine that the gap between human art and any art made by birds or paintings made by circus elephants or chimpanzees is there's this gap between those, and this is, it's true and maybe not even very contentious, and I have yet again probably been overthinking something which could be simply expressed as, I don't think birds are artists. But that doesn't mean that a human being couldn't get much out of a painting made by a pondering pachyderm, an elephant expressing herself by splashing paint onto a canvas with her trunk, or indeed that a human checking out the wonderful creations of bowerbirds could have a beautiful, artful experience. But I believe that the dimension experienced, the coming into being of the art experience, is something which happens inside the human being. The human being looking at this art, looking at this object, is making it into an art experience, but it's the human that is doing that. So the art experience is created by a human being in a way that if a person looks at a piece of bark or a photograph of Mount Fuji shrouded in fog, then it becomes artworks when they are encountered by human beings, not before, and not when the piece of bark or the photograph of Mount Fuji shrouded in fog is looked at by a turtle. So this also doesn't necessarily mean that when a dog or a bonobo, which is related to the chimpanzee, looks at a painting by Magritte, or a performance of, or some pages containing Allen Ginsberg's Howl poem, or a performance by Marina Abramovich, the animal, dog or bonobo, might have some kind of experience. But what I'm saying is that their experience will be so different that calling it art, an art experience, seems kind of pointless, like with the shack and the opera house. A dog might like it, what they see. A bonobo might be interested, but what they would get from it would not be what you or I would get from it. So, my answer to the question of whether I believe shows are exclusively human phenomena is yes. I believe that showtime is 100% artificial and therefore completely human. A show, as we understand it along the way of the showman, is a uniquely human phenomenon which has the potential for complete transformation of human reality. The contents and possible ways of presenting, experiencing, and interpreting a show is combinatorially explosive, and these multitudes of complexity can only be experienced by us. When showman and audience gathers in a shared attention, something new becomes possible in the world, something new under the sun. Even though we did earlier say that nothing is new under the sun, I think this is new in the context of deep time, though, or evolutionary time, because this kind of art experience is at least 45,000 years old, which is the dates of our oldest sort of non-controversial cave art findings. But perhaps this art experience is as old as humanity itself, which is currently estimated to be about 250 to 300,000 years old. That's when the first Homo sapiens started cruising around. Now, the art experience is not wholly showman. It's not wholly audience, but it is a synergistic emergent property, a new domain akin to how biology emerges from physics. Part showman, part audience, all human being. And I think this is what's meant with the 100% artificial and therefore completely human that we read about towards the end of the Illuminated Manifesto. It is a meeting space between leader and tribe, of shaman and community, of teacher and student, musician and audience, one and many. It's a space between. It's a place of interest. A place of interest. It's a midway where we find the origins of all human culture. So when a showman pulls his audience into the chaotic experience of showtime, we're dealing with a purely human phenomena, a process of sense-making unique to our species, a sense which can only be made by human beings, and moreover which I think is the deepest and most meaningful kind of sense there is to be made for humans. This something extra which is added to the ordinary experience. This space where time is counted as moments rather than minutes adds the super and the extra, which enhances the natural and ordinary into the supernatural and the extraordinary. 100% artificial, and therefore completely human. It's showtime. And there we go, reaching the end of a complex answer to a simple question. I hope you get something out of it. And I myself really do enjoy when I can make these far distant connections. I don't know how successful I always am in being able to convey it, like stone tools, how the development of stone tool might have a similar way of evolving or developing. The technology of stone tools might be similar to the development of juggling history. It's something that I spoke about in the episode with Jay, which is something that maybe I will make an episode about in the future. These are very obscure topics, but I do love to see these connections, and I do think that the real creative discoveries are made when you are connecting two things which at the beginning or at the outset seems to be completely not connected. So anyway, more about that and creativity another time. For now, I'd just like to ask you to tell your friend that this podcast exists, and if you like what I do, it'd be excellent if you wrote me a 5-star review. Say that the show is excellent. Put it on iTunes or anywhere else where you get your podcast. You can make a donation by going to buymeacoffee.com/Captain Frodo, and there you can click a button, and with a couple of simple clicks you can support it. But anyway, the main thing for me is that you keep listening. And until next time, take care of yourself and those you love, and I hope to see you along the way.